The work is mysterious and important, and we deal with the uncertainty it brings us in the way that Kier would have wanted. Together, as a family.
Hey guys, Pete here. It's time to talk about my favorite thing, which right now is Severance on Apple TV+. Episode 4 just came out and ended with a massive cliffhanger, and we also found out that I was wrong about the one from last week, sort of. The 4th episode takes its name from Rickon's book, The You Are. It's a spiritual biography of you, and this episode is another fine installment that asks, what if the you are isn't a kind and caring person? At least not to the other you are. Which happens to be fairly important in this context of bifurcated realities. Let's look at what's going on in MDR down in that crazy basement of Lumon Industries, beyond what is turning out to be one hell of an on-screen romance. I'll be recapping everything that happened and talk about what I think it all might mean right after a quick spoiler warning. If you haven't watched Severance Season 1 Episode 4 yet, then this video won't be for you. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so I may have been a little premature last week when I said the break room seemed more annoying than something you would find horrifying. Episode 4 opens with Helly continuing to read the compunction statement, and from the looks of things, she's been there for a while. Milchek looks at a printout before telling her he's afraid she still doesn't mean it. It is time for her to go home, but he assures her they'll try again in the morning. You see her leave, and since we haven't seen things from the perspective of her Outie since the first episode, she immediately returns the next day. You learn that she has already read the statement 259 times, and when she starts again, you start to hear a voice in the background. She kind of breaks down saying that she is really sorry. She really is. And he looks at this and says, hey, you're paraphrasing, and has her start over. You'll learn later that she had to do this 1,072 times. And when she brought up the angry mumbly voice she heard, Dylan thinks she's talking about the crying baby he apparently hears. And he gives her the advice that the trick is to think about something you're really sorry about. There's an indication that Helly's experience might be on the brutal end of the spectrum, but no one really seems surprised, which means the break room is actually no joke. Not everything is so bad though, because Bert shows up in MDR in the flesh with pre-release handbook totes. This is the first time we've seen someone in their office from a different department, and it's a great little back and forth between Irv and Bert. Of course, Dylan isn't so happy to see him, and he grabs a stapler and gets aggressive. When asked how he found it, he says his predecessor visited when they used to do summits, so I don't know what that's all about. But when Dylan brought up the idea of them disemboweling people again, kind of picking up with what he was talking about in the previous episode, I got to thinking that these ideas had to come from somewhere. Dylan is quirky, he has some crazy ideas about what might be going on outside the building, but when he talks about this history with O&D, it sounds like that's coming from an actual source. Either way, as he's leaving, Bert offers a tour of O&D if they ever want, and he leaves a map. It feels like Irv takes him up on this offer immediately. I'm not sure if there's supposed to be the sense of some time passing there, but he does it citing Kier's original vision of everyone working together. He follows the very nondescript map, and he makes it to O&D where he's greeted by Felicia. He gets a look around and confesses to Bert that he cried when they put up the painting The Youthful Convalescence of Kier, saying he never thought he would see the handbook passage depicted visually. Bert shows him the actual painting, which they have stored in a drawer, and as they recite a passage about it together, they make a move and they touch hands. And then Irv sort of freaks out and leaves. On the way back, he passes the conference room where Milchek was reading Rickon's book. Remember, he left it there when the alarms went off and he had to go help Mark with Helly. She had seen him looking at Petey's map, and while he's in the kitchen, she goes into his drawer and takes it. This leads to a heated discussion about the rules, and ultimately Mark shreds the map to prove that he doesn't care about it. That does seem to be in contrast with the fact that we had seen him looking at it kind of obsessively up until that point, but it's done, and Irv comes in to tell him about the emergency at the same time. It's just raining contraband today. So Rickon's book is there. It's definitely not supposed to be. It has has the inscription to Mark inside, and it's hilarious that he doesn't know what this is or who this person is that wrote it. Irv thinks it might be a loyalty test. He brings up something that has to do with spicy candy. Dylan thinks it's booty, and Mark just says that he'll be turning it into Milchek. While they're out of the office, Helly discovers the paper cutter, which she takes into Miss Coble's office and threatens to cut off her fingers with it if she won't give her a camera to make a resignation plea to her Outie. They do give in and allow her to make the video, and you see her getting ready to leave through the elevator. On her way out, she tells Mark, "I guess this is the part where I should tell you to go to hell, but you're already here," and tells Milchek she was never sorry, just to get one more in before she goes. Again, you see this situation where the door closes and she leaves, and then returns holding a different video in the same hand that her Outie made for her. In that, she hears that her Outie understands that she's unhappy with the life she's been given, but she doesn't care. The Outie says that she's a person, and the innie is not. She makes the decisions, and if the innie ever does anything to her fingers, know that she'll keep her alive long enough to horribly regret that. Her resignation request is denied, and that is devastating for several reasons, which we'll come back to. There were two parts to last week's cliffhanger. One of those was the phone that Petey left behind at Mark's house. Outie Mark picked that up at the beginning of the episode and saw that all the calls in the log are from a blocked number. For the time being, he just puts it in a box and leaves it. The second part was what happened to Petey, and at home, Mark gets a notification from the Kier Chronicle and learns that Petey did in fact die, and the headline reads that it happened after he collapsed from an unknown ailment. If you zoom in and read the text under the photo, it reads, "While the severance procedure remains statistically very safe, its reversal can be fatal." After reading this, he looks at his basement door, and we see the box where he hid the phone and can hear that it's ringing inside. After the news gets out, Grainer comes to Coble's office to ask if she's heard from the board yet. She hasn't, and he thinks that they'll understand that this wasn't their fault. She brings up reintegration, which he reminds her the board has never acknowledged. And that kind of makes you think that this has happened before, but there's no way to tell. She wants to get her hands on his chip, and he tells her the body will be destroyed by cremation after the funeral. At her desk, she says the 9 core principles out loud: vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, and wiles. She says wiles twice while she looks at an old black and white portrait of someone in a small frame that she keeps on her desk. And I found that one kind of surprising, and I had to go look it up to make sure, and it turns out it's mentioned on the fake LinkedIn profile the TV show made. Mark decides to go to Petey's funeral and is surprised when he runs into Mrs. Selvig there. He says he's there because the news report said he worked at Lumon, so he thought he might know the guy, and she makes up a story about him visiting her shop. He meets Petey's ex-wife and his daughter, and she asks him if he ever thought the best way to deal with a messed up situation in your life isn't just to shut your brain off half the time. This made me wonder what drove Petey to want to do the procedure in the first place, and I wonder if we'll see this character again. While they're watching a video of her performing Enter Sandman with her father in their garage, Mrs. Selvig goes and removes the Lumon chip from his head. I mean, she gets right in there with a drill and just takes it out. It is a closed casket, so no one notices immediately, and Mark is affected by watching the video, so he decides to leave, and she uses that as her chance to get out of there, leaving with him. When they get back, instead of going into his house, he drives in his car to the spot where his wife's accident happened, and we see him step over the guardrail and touch the tree as tears stream down his face. The next day at the office, Harmony shows Petey's chip to Milchek, who takes it up to diagnostics for her. Then Miss Casey arrives, and she tells her that she wants to run a special wellness session for Mark S. Irv goes looking for Bert again. They talk in front of the water fountain, and Bert apologizes for touching his hand, but Irv quickly tells them it isn't necessary. The way they share this sort of religious devotion to the company makes all of their interactions so much fun to watch. And at the end of this one, he tells him he doesn't just speak to us through the handbook and the paintings, he finds other ways. You learn that Mark did not turn over Rickon's book to Milchek, and now that the map has been shredded, he spends his alone time in the bathroom reading that. In the chapter he's looking at, Rickon is talking about living abroad as a beggar, relying on the charity of strangers. It ends with the idea that your job needs you, not the other way around. The last sequence is set up as a kind of montage. Helly says goodbye to Dylan, and when she walks out, you see that she's carrying an extension cord. And then she also grabs the trash can in the hallway as she walks past that. Mark is waiting for his wellness session, and Dylan takes the opportunity to look in his desk, where he finds the UUR, and he starts to read it too. His reading of the acrostic poem Destiny continues through the end of the episode. In the session, Ms. Casey lights Mark's wife's candle, and she gives him some clay to sculpt out how he's feeling. And as he gets started, you see that Harmony is watching the session in her office. Irv decides to turn back to O&D before he goes back to MDR. When he doesn't see anyone, he hears a noise coming from a door in the back of their space. When he looks inside, he finds a massive room with several additional employees working with Bert and Felicia. Mark starts to sculpt the tree where his wife's crash happened, and as Harmony's looking at that, it makes you wonder if this is concerning, because should his innie know anything about that? Is this confirming what Petey said about him bringing that with him? Helly has made it to the elevator and made a noose out of the extension cord. You see that Irv looks somewhat disoriented as he's walking back from O&D, and then you see Helly kick out the garbage can below her as the episode ends. Last week I was wrong about Petey being dead, but I'm gonna go there again because this never really felt like an ending for Helly. I don't think you would play it as a cliffhanger if that was the case. If she was going to die from this, I believe they would have had that happen before the credits came up. Petey felt like he performed his role in the story. Could you say the same for Helly? At this point, I still think she's our window into what it's like for people when they first experience this. Her reaction is more extreme than some or even most probably, but my guess is that no one just wakes up and thinks, okay, this sounds great, show me how to take care of these scary numbers. I think until you adjust, you probably just would kind of want to escape. Helly having to face the reality that her outie doesn't care how bad it is for her at work is kind of what makes this story more interesting than one where you just lose all your memories. They still are adult human beings that know things. Their experiential realities just begin when they wake up on the table. Their experiences are that limited when they only have access to their innie memories. You kind of see this when she was about to hang herself and she thinks about that short conversation with Mark. It was a nice exchange that showed both characters in a good light that made you feel bad that she was about to die, but it almost felt like this was her greatest memory from her short existence. That highlights everything horrible about finding out the other version of you doesn't have your back. Where can she even go from here? The special wellness session is also pretty interesting. The candle is a very specific inclusion that's hard to explain in a way that doesn't involve her testing if he can experience his outie's memories. Could she really be trying to do something that would be comforting for him? Sure, but this is the same person who took a drill to Petey's skull to find out what was going on with his chip. Her behavior here seems to back up my thoughts from last week's video, that it's important for them to keep anything negative from getting out. Everything they do is set up to indoctrinate the severed employees, and you get the idea that it's working through the constant references to the handbook. There's a reservoir of great lines to draw from there, and I like how Irv, who never tires of going there, chose to overlook my favorite one from this episode. Render not my creation in miniature, Irv. Bert's map is a clear violation. I guess everyone bends the rules when it suits them. Speaking of Bert, I'm not sure what to make of the rest of O&D. Because he kept it a secret, I think it might come off as being more nefarious than it actually is. In MDR, they don't even know what they do. The work is mysterious and important, and they deal with it as Keir intended, together as a family. I know in one of the promo videos, the show's creators said they try to keep the departments away from each other, so things are naturally mysterious. Through Dylan and Felicia, we see that it's also somewhat tribal. I don't think we can say that what's going on here is that much different than what we see in MDR, but we'll have to wait to find out. Petey was convinced that some people never get to leave, but I didn't get that vibe here. There are so many interesting details just hanging out there. I can't wait to see how some of this stuff, like the dirt under Irv's fingernails, comes back up. I love the idea of their baby brains being infected by Rickon's book. Imagine if the only thing you've really read is the handbook. How profound this might actually seem. Everything still seems to be firing on all cylinders. I know that there was a director change in this episode and the vision still seemed consistent. With the pacing, it almost seems as if they ratchet things up as the episode progresses. And the idea of a big cliffhanger at the end of every episode could be tiring, but these all seem to be set up pretty well. The prospect of this leading to something even bigger is pretty exciting. I thought this was another great episode, and there's so much stuff I could go on forever, but this is probably a good place to stop. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this cliffhanger, the terrible ordeal that Helly's Outie is putting her through. What are they going to find out when they look at Petey's chip? And when is Mark going to answer that telephone? Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.